Everyone knows that the sales is one of the most important thing in businesses. And for you to be good at sales, you have to speak really clear and really well. And I'm not really good at that right this moment, and I really need to improve because sooner or later I will have to talk to more clients and a lot of people, and I have to make myself clear so I don't have to repeat myself and everyone can understand me. So to do that, I'ma follow Kai Cenat example and I'ma start reading out loud to see if this improves. Hopefully I will be able to speak better English, and also I will do maybe some Romanian speaking in my free time because there's no point of filming myself reading Romanian because maybe somebody that's watching from another country won't understand me, and English it's just more general. So I'm gonna read for 10-15 minutes from a book that I started reading uh, 2 weeks ago. It's called Shop Management. I talked about it in the last video or the previous one, whatever. So I'ma just do that. So let's get right into it. This is not the beginning of the book. I've already read some parts, but I'm not that much into it, so I think you'll get it. I think you'll get it even though you don't know the whole book because there are separate information and everything is gonna be useful. In the case of the yard labor at Bethlehem, each class of work was studied as above, each element being timed separately, and in addition a record was kept in many cases of the total amount of work done by the man in a day. The record of the gross work of the man who is being timed is in most cases not necessary after the observer is skilled in his work. As the Bethlehem time observer was new to his work, the gross time was useful in checking his detailed observation in checking his detailed observ in checking his detailed observation and so gradually educating him and giving him confidence in the new methods. The writer had so many other duties that his personal help was confined to teaching the proper methods and approving the details of various changes which were in all cases outlined in written reports before being carried out. As soon as As soon as a careful study has been made of the time elements entering into one class of work, a single first-class workman was picked out and started on ordinary piecework on his job. His task required him to do between three and one half and 4 times as much in a day as had been done in the past on an average. Between 12 and 13 tons of pig iron per man had been carried from a pile on the ground up an inclined plank and loaded onto a gondola car by the average pig iron handler while working by the day. The man in doing this work had worked in gangs from 5 to 20 men. The man selected from one of those gangs to make the first start under the writer system was called upon to load on piecework from 45 to 48 tons per day. He regarded this task as an entirely fair one and earned on average from the start $1.85 per day, which was 60% more than he had been paid by the day. This man happened to be considerable. This man happened to be considerably lighter than the average good workman at this class of work. He weighed about he weighed about 130 pounds. He proved, however, to be especially well suited to this job and was kept at it steadily throughout the time that the writer was in Bethlehem, and some years later was still at the same work. Being the first piece work started in the works, it excited considerable opposition both on the part of the workmen and of several of the leading men in the town, their opposition being based mainly on the old fallacy that if peace work proved successful, a great many men would be thrown out of work, and that thereby not only the workmen but the whole town would suffer. Now let's look the word fallacy, because I really don't know what it means. Fallacy meaning a mistaken belief, especially one based on unsound arguments. So a mistaken belief. Okay. So right there it's meaning like an old belief that's wrong. So that's what it means. One after another of the new men who were started silently on this job were either persuaded or intimidated into giving it up. In many cases, they were given other work by those interested in preventing piecework at wages higher than the ruling wages. In the meantime, however, the first man who started on the work earned steadily $1.85 per day, and this object lesson gradually wore out the concerted opposition, which ceased rather suddenly after about 2 months. From this time on, there was no difficulty in getting plenty of good men who were anxious to start on piecework, and the difficulty laying in making with sufficient rapidity the accurate time study of the elementary operations or unit times, which forms the foundation of this kind of piecework. Throughout the introduction of piecework, when after a thorough time, I don't know how this is spelled, so let's look it real quick. Thorough. Okay. Throughout the introduction of piecework, when after a thorough time study a new section of the work was started, one man only was put on each job, and not more than one man was allowed to work at it until he had demonstrated that the task set was a fair one by earning an average of $1.85 per day. After a few sections of the work had been started in this way, the complaint on the part of the better workmen was that they weren't allowed to go on to piecework fast enough. It required about 2 years to transfer practically all of the yard labor from day to piecework, and the larger the part of the transfer was made during the last 6 months of the time. As stated above, the greater part of the time was taken up in studying unit times, and this time study was greatly delayed by having successfully the two leading men who had been trained to practice, who had been trained to work, had been trained to the work leave because they were offered much larger salaries elsewhere. The study of unit times for the yard labor took practically the time of two trained men for 2 years. Throughout this time, the day and piece workers were under entirely separate and distinct management. The original foreman continued to manage the day work, and day and piece workers were never allowed to work together. Gradually, the day work gang was diminished, and the piece workers were increased as one section of work after another was transformed from the former to the latter. Two elements which were important to the success of this work should be noted. First, on the morning following each day's work, each workman was given a slip of paper informing him in detail just how much work he had done the day before and the amount he had earned. This enabled him to measure his performance against his earnings while the details were fresh in his mind. Without this, there would have been great dissatisfaction among those who failed to climb up to the task asked of them, and many would have gradually fallen off in their performance. The second, whenever it was practicable, each man's work was measured by itself. Only when absolutely necessary was the work of two men measured up together and the price divided between them, and then care was taken to select two men of as nearly as possible the same capacity. Only on few occasions, only on few occasions, and then upon special permission signed by the writer, were more than two men allowed to work on a gang work, dividing their earnings between them. Gang work almost invariably results in a falling off in earnings and consequent dissatisfaction. An interesting illustration of the desirability of individual piecework instead of gang work came to our attention at Bethlehem. Several of the best piece workers among the Bethlehem yard laborers were informed by their friends that a much higher price per ton was paid for shoveling or in another works than the rate given at Bethlehem. After talking the matter over with the writer, he advised them to go to the other works, which they accordingly did. In about a month, they were all back at work in Bethlehem again, having found that the other work they were at the they having found out that at the other works they were obligated to work with a gang of men instead of individual piecework, and that the rest of the gang worked so slowly that in spite of the high price per ton, they earned much less than in Bethlehem. Table 1 on page 54 gives a summary of the work done by the piecework laborers in handling raw materials such as ores, anthracite, and bituminous, coal, coke, pig iron, sand, limestone, cinder, scale, ashes, etc. in the works of the Bethlehem Steel Company during the year April 30th, 1900. This work consisted mainly in loading and unloading in loading and unloading cars on arrival or departure from the works, and for local transportation, and was done entirely by hand without the use of cranes or other machinery. When the writer left the steelworks, the Bethlehem Peace Workers were the finest body of picked laborers that he has ever seen together. They were practically all first-class men, because in each case the task which they were called upon to perform was such that only a first-class man could do it. The tasks were all purposely made so serve not more than one of not more than one of the five laborers, perhaps even a smaller percentage than this, could keep up. Footnotes to Table 1. It was our intention to fix peace. It was our intention to fix piecework rates, which should enable first-class workmen to average about 60% more than they had been earning on day work, namely $1.85 per day. A year's average shows them to have earned 1.88 per day, or 3 cents per man per day more than we expected, an error of 1 and 6. I don't know how you read that percent. The piece workers handled on an average 3.5 times more, as many 3.5 times as many tons per day as the day workers. And footnotes to Table 1. It was clearly understood by each newcomer as he went to work, and unless he was able to average at least 1.85 per day, he would have to make way for another man who could do so. As a result, first-class men from all over that part of the country, who were in most cases earning from $1.05 to $1.15 per day, were anxious to try their hands at earning $1.85 per day. If they succeeded, they were naturally contented, and if they failed, they left. Sorry that they were unable to maintain the proper pace, but with no hard feelings either toward the system or the management. Throughout the time that the writer was there, labor was as scarce and as difficult to get as it ever has been in the history of this country, and yet there was always a surplus of first-class men ready to leave other jobs and try their hand at Bethlehem piecework. And I'm gonna stop here because I don't wanna make this video too long. It's just an experiment to see how anyone that watches this video reacts. I might be continuing to do this because it really helps me, and hopefully I can speak more fluent English, which is exactly what I want. I'm gonna do the exact same thing. I'm gonna do the exact same thing in Romanian, but I'm not gonna film it like I said. Hope you enjoyed the content. Maybe this gives you maybe this gives you an idea to start to doing the same. And to end this video, I had a phone call with a possible client today. There is a salon that we offer to build their website for free, and they kind of agreed we have to go to a meeting next week on Friday. So it's a really good start of this thing. Hopefully we can all agree to work together, and then we'll see what happens.